Before the UFOs of the 1940s, there were sightings across America from the fall of 1896 through the spring of 1897. Witnesses were in the thousands, and descriptions ranged from lights in the sky to cigar or egg-shaped craft of unknown origin. Was this the first wave of UFOs to visit our planet, or a fad driven by outlandish tall tales, cleverly designed hoaxes, and the greed of newspaper companies eager to sell more issues to entertain a willing public? Stick around for the twists and turns of the great airship wave of 1896 and 97. Oh, and this time around, Steve gives spelling the old college try.
The hunter is Craig Salk. S-U-L-K. Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I'm Stephen Hawk.
And I'm Jimmy Coe.
Tonight, we have a very aerial episode for you, full of gases other than air, like hydrogen, helium, perhaps. We don't know. Or maybe Mars, floating dust. I don't know.
Mars floating dust. Is that a scientifically proven thing?
No, it's not. It's something I tried to make up off the top of my head. Yeah, tonight we're going to be doing an episode on the airship phenomenon, the ancient airships from the late 1800s. A lot of people consider precursors to the modern UFO phenomena, but some very strange reports that were happening all across the country and in other parts of the world, mostly around the late 1800s, but we found a few cases that started in the 1880s and went all the way up to like 1913. Jimmy, that New Zealand case you had talked about, that was, I guess, officially an airship type sighting.
Sure.
Was it Jules Verne or maybe H.G. Wells? No, probably Edgar Rice Burroughs. They had the airships in those old Martian novels from the 1930s, and they had a substance called float wood that allowed their airships to float.
Was it from Mars? Was it Martian float wood?
Yeah, Martian float wood. The funny thing was there was no trees left on Mars. The planet was dying.
Yeah, because they cut all the trees down to use it in the Martian float wood airships.
Yeah, like they say happened at Easter Island, right? They cut all the trees down to roll those Moai statues down to the sea. That's why all the trees died.
Yeah, and then subsequently all the food's gone, and then starvation ensues. Then you have an island full of cannibals and statues.
And we'll talk about that another time.
Sure.
The Moai.
Moai. Moai.
All right, so anyway, moving on. Enough of that. So anyway, Jimmy, what have you been up to this week, man? Oh, by the way, as we record this, today is Thanksgiving. You won't be hearing this episode for a few days, but yeah, the day of giving thanks. What are you thankful for, young James?
I'm thankful I got all those projects out the door so that I can relax a little. My day job.
That is great.
It is. Yeah. I just vegged all day today. I did nothing. I just laid back and tried to calm my mind.
How did it work out for you?
Played with my Cthulhu doll. It worked out great. I took a nap, hugged my little Cthulhu doll. It was a good day.
Twisting on the tentacles.
Yeah, in my sleep.
So you seen anything good in the news?
Well, I saw something pretty cool. Lou Elizondo, our buddy, he's out.
You and Lou, man, you have some kind of love affair with Lou Elizondo.
I love Lou, man. He's great. Him and Christopher Mellon, those two cats. Love those guys. So Lou went over across the ocean and went over to, I think, Great Britain. He goes over there and they have this GQ Heroes event.
GQ?
GQ? Yeah, GQ.
I've looked at some deja vu going on here.
Yeah, because I'd mentioned this before, but they finally released the video from the event because he was on the cover of GQ. And then the event happened, and they videotaped it, and he did some question and answers with the crowd and just pretty much reiterated his position and experience with the UOP task force.
Let me guess. He said, I worked for ATIP. I can't tell you what I saw.
That's exactly. Yep.
Man, it is so awesome. There's definitely something going on. I'm not saying anything, but it could be extraterrestrial, but I can't tell you what it was.
So you've seen it.
It's all top secret and stuff. But if you had seen it, you would agree with me.
So you've either seen it or you put on a Lou Elizondo mask and stood in for him for the interview.
That drives me nuts, man.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, as I've stated many times, I think, on this podcast.
Yeah. So the follow up on that, ATIP is gone, and they are replacing it with a new program. Do you want to hear the name of the new program?
Yeah.
The name of the new program is, and this just rolls off the tongue, really, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group.
So let's see. What's the acronym going to be for that? The military has to have an acronym. The Pentagon does not create an organization without an acronym.
I think it would be like AOMSGUG. AOMSGUG.
Yeah, I saw this story. I posted it on Facebook. This is from the New York Post. It says Washington is stepping up efforts to probe possible alien activity after officials admitted they could not explain the phenomena of UFO sightings. The new outfit comes after the intelligence community verified a series of unexplained aerial phenomena sightings by the military earlier this year, but said it could not identify the mysterious vehicles in a report to Congress detailing the government's knowledge of UFOs. Yeah, Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group.
And it sounds like their focus is going to be on incursions into military space.
There's been many reports of UFOs around military installations, military bases. I think they are going to focus on that. I think they're going to also focus on UFOs harassing our task force as training, such as we saw with the Nimitz and some of the other Navy encounters.
Yeah, they say unexplained vehicles. Here they have it. Unexplained vehicles that traveled at speeds up to 43 miles per hour and changed direction on a dime. And
Did you say 43 miles per hour? That is smoking, man.
43,000 miles per hour.
You left 1,000 there.
Did I? I don't know. We'll play that back, Steve.
I was going to say, I hope they're not going through a school zone.
So, would you put your coffee on the dash if you're going 43,000 miles an hour and then you change on a dime?
Well, I mean, it's obvious they have some type of inertial compensation system, some type of artificial gravity, to compensate all of that inertia.
So that would probably be, you put it on the dash.
Be like sitting in your living room, right?
Yeah.
Because if not, you would be nothing but a red pasty mixture on the wall.
Or in this case, maybe green.
Or green.
Green. Or
right?
blue. Or aqua. Marine.
I got a good story for you. A Michigan hunter believes he got Bigfoot on camera.
Oh, yeah. This is that November 5th sighting.
In Michigan's Upper Peninsula, captured footage of what some believe to be Bigfoot. The hunter is Craig Salk, S-U-L-K. Recorded the suspicious creature on one of his many trail cameras set up on his 80 acres of property. He used the trail cameras primarily to monitor game moving through his land. He didn't want to tell anyone about what he believed he witnessed on his cameras because he figured he would get called crazy. Instead, he reached out to the producers of the Animal Planet show Finding Bigfoot to get their thoughts. The next day, they decided to come to Michigan and investigate, so they checked it out. I guess the Finding Bigfoot crew looked at it. But anyway, have you seen the video?
I have not.
Yeah, jump on Facebook there real quick. Check it out. I posted this story.
I'm watching it, they're walking through the forest, and there's twigs. Obviously, there's been a Bigfoot there because there's twigs. And this guy's whomping and beating sticks against a tree.
Well, it's really just there's two photos. I'm assuming that's not some type of full video, but there's a deer in the foreground, which is what's causing the trail camera to go off. And then way down in the edge of the woods, not sure how far away, it looks to be maybe 30, 40 yards. There does appear to be a bipedal something, all one color, one solid color. It appears black on the poor quality of the video. But anyway, interesting, pretty cool to look at.
I mean, do you think it looks like a Bigfoot here, man?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, for what you can tell, but it could be anything. I mean, it's not crystal clear, as most photos are of Bigfoot and UFOs. And if it was crystal clear, everyone would just say it was a hoax. So there you go.
Well, that's just a hunter that's not wearing his blaze orange in the background there trying to get a beat on that deer.
Anyway, let's move on.
Please.
If listeners would like to check that out, go to our Facebook page. And while you're there, check out Instagram and our homepage, cosmicsponge.com. If you'd like to reach out to the show, our contact information is firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. And don't forget to check out Instagram. All right, let's move on to tonight's main topic. Oh, be sure and rate and review. It helps other people find the show.
It does.
All right, so let's move on to tonight's topic. We are going to be talking about airships, the perhaps first wave of UFO sightings. But, you know, the thing I got into, the thing I noticed the most when I started looking at this subject is how uncharacteristic they are of later on UFO sightings. They seem normal on the outside, but at the same time, they're weird. There's weird occupants doing inexplicable things, as we've often seen with these kind of cases. Jimmy, you want to jump onto one of these and kick us off?
Sure. Let's start with November 1896.
The airship cases are mostly between 1896 and 1897, but as I said, there were a few others that we'll touch on afterwards. But these are the main crux of them, where they seem to move west to east.
It had rained all day, and a thick blanket of clouds covered the evening sky as the sun set on Sacramento, California. It was November 17th, 1896, just after 5 o'clock p.m., when darkness settled over the capital. Around 6:30 p.m., the first of many sightings of a seemingly large searchlight attached to a cigar-shaped craft occurred. The first witness, a horse trainer by trade, was headed home when he observed the light bobbing up and down low in the night sky. Voices could be heard coming from the craft shouting, "We're too close to the ground, men," and commenting they hoped to reach San Francisco by morning. The Sacramento Bee, a prominent local paper, would report eyewitness accounts of the event the following day. Through the middle of December of that year, sightings would continue on the West Coast from San Jose up to Seattle, Washington, and even into Western Canada. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped, and by the end of December, the airship sightings came to an end. That is, until February of 1897. Less than 2 months after the initial wave of the West Coast sightings, the phenomenon started up once again, with the Omaha Bee reporting an airship sighting over Hastings, Nebraska on February 1st. Once again, airships were seen in Kansas, Tennessee, Illinois, and Iowa, eventually spreading north into Wisconsin and south into Texas and Louisiana. Then, by May of that year, the airships disappeared from our skies once more, leaving behind an unusual footnote in the history of unexplained aerial phenomena. Let's talk about some of the history and stories of airships in America.
It is what appears to be on the surface just a standard airship, dirigible perhaps, that one would imagine technologically could have existed around the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. However, if one looks at the true history of dirigibles and airships, I mean, we had, of course, balloons, first balloon flight, something like 1783 in France, I think.
That's right. 1783 with the Montgolfier brothers. the Montgolfier brothers Globe Aerostatique.
Right. And so, you know, we have a few of the balloons and stuff, but when we want to talk about, say, the airship, okay, you think of a dirigible or maybe even a blimp, similar to the Goodyear blimp.
So just for our listeners out there who might not know what the difference is between a blimp, a dirigible, and a hot air balloon, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So a hot air balloon, as they exist today, of course, just literally uses hot air. It's an open balloon. Everybody's probably seen video of this, but they use these propane torches, these propane heaters to literally just heat the air up. Hot air rises. So they just heat the air up. It inflates the balloon with this hot air. Eventually it rises, inflates. The early balloons were usually filled with hydrogen, which is our lightest element in the universe. So hydrogen naturally floats. It exists high in the atmosphere, so a bag filled with hydrogen will just float out of sight. Now, what's in a kid's balloon is helium, which is another very light element. Not quite as light as hydrogen, but the nice thing about helium is it's not flammable, which hydrogen very much is. And if you've ever seen a disaster film of the Hindenburg or a Led Zeppelin album, you know that, fire and the hydrogen doesn't go very well together. So, but a balloon is just or let's say, pear-shaped balloon with the pear being upside down and a gondola hung from the bottom of it, whether it's hot air balloon, helium, or hydrogen. A blimp is still a soft fabric, but it's shaped more elongated so that it can go through the sky. It typically has large fins on the back of it, kind of rocket-shaped. It'll also have a gondola under the bottom as well, which would be the crew compartment or the passenger compartment, but that entire bag is just filled with gas. Now, a dirigible is a rigid airship. The most famous ones were the ones built by von Zeppelin. He had his first successful flights in 1900. Now, what he did was build a frame, an aluminum frame, covered it with fabric. Inside of that frame would be a number of gas bags. So the frame itself wasn't filled with gas. It was these bladders inside of the length, that ran the whole length. So they could maybe even spring a leak in one of the gas bags and it wouldn't crash to the ground because they had others. They had other backup. Of course, the Germans used hydrogen. I know back in those days, the only free source of helium was in Texas. We politically didn't get along so well with Germany, so we didn't sell them helium, and hence the Hindenburg. Yeah, the age of the airship began around 1900. Von Zeppelin built several of these very large, very, very large, compared to any aircraft even today. He built these airships, but he really didn't start building them until around 1900, even though we saw some other rigid and blimp experiments, particularly in Europe, not a whole lot in the United States. These airship sightings that we're talking about are preceding before airships really got into normal use. You just didn't see blimps and airships that often until at least by the 19-teens. You might see some for military use and so forth. But the end of the airship came with the crash of the Hindenburg in New Jersey, whenever it suddenly burst into flames as it was coming to a landing in 1938. And that pretty much spelled the end of the airship era. I mean, they still use blimps, like the Goodyear blimp is still used somewhat. And, who knows? Airships may come back. I've seen a few things here and there.
By this time, this 1 year, approximately 1 year, it's straddled 2 years, 1896 and 1897, running from November to May, we have this flap of airships that are occurring. And up to this point in history, there's really been no successful airships built that have the capability of traversing the skies in as fast as they're being observed, having traveled, and having the control, the ability to propel itself in the air, because before that, everything relied on the wind.
And of course, one of the big limitations of that era is there's no decent engines or electric motors or anything to propel it if it does have propellers on it.
I've got one here that in 1852, Henry Gifford's airship used a 3-horsepower steam engine to turn a propeller with 3 blades and drive his dirigible 17 miles or 27 kilometers from Paris to Alencourt. So all of this, though, most of this development was occurring in Europe. And
that's right.
Not a lot happening in the U.S.
So if you want to look where airship development was in that era, in 1883, the first electric-powered flight was made by Gaston Tendusser, who fitted a 1.5 horsepower Siemens electric motor to an airship. It was called the La France. He flew for 8 kilometers. It's about 5 miles. Peter Campbell did an exhibition flight. So from 1888, 1897, Friedrich Wolfert built 3 airships, which caught fire and killed both occupants in 1897. Used a 2-horsepower Daimler engine. Flew about 6 miles. What we're getting at here is that on one hand, a skeptic may say, oh, well, there was just someone experimenting with airships in California. It must have been, just a regular dirigible. Those were around back then. No, they weren't. You really didn't start seeing airships until probably 20 years later, the true dirigibles. Now, if all these sightings would have occurred in, say, 1925, I would say, yeah, okay, I'll go along with that, because we had a couple of large rigid airships that were built for us, built by von Zeppelin. They built us 2. That was an agreement after World War I that they would supply us with a couple of airships. These sightings happened much earlier. The capabilities that we're talking about were beyond anything that was flying then. Now, one rumor, of course, is some people said, well, there must have been a secret inventor working in ranch somewhere and working on his airship, wanting to perfect the designs before he revealed it to the public. That's a possible explanation. I mean, it makes me think of Captain Nemo, having that technology, kind of a Jules Verne thing, developing a submarine with technology beyond what was available for the day. Those kind of things usually just don't happen. Even if you're an inventor and you're a bit secretive, typically inventors need money. If you're going to be building some type of airship, which I can imagine would be a very expensive endeavor, you most likely would want to find investors to help you along the way.
Unless you're rich.
Well, there's that. It's the Batman phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
Bruce Wayne, you're already independently wealthy, and so you can just spend your fortune building airships in secret.
Bruce Wayne's great-great-grandfather, Harold Wayne. Or maybe Henry Harrison Hart Wayne, or George D. Collins Wayne.
Let's just assume that's not the case. And in fact, it's so funny to think about this because Thomas Edison, at the time that these airships were being sighted around the country, had to give a official public statement that said it was not him experimenting with airships, because Thomas Edison, of course, was a very prolific inventor of the day, brought all of these modern amenities along with electricity to everyone, right, to the world. I mean, who knows how many patents this man owned. A lot of people speculated that it was Thomas Edison that was building the airship or experimenting on it, and he said, no, it's not me. He very strongly stated in the press that I'm not building this airship. That's not me.
He went so far as to say even that not only is he not building it, nor would he build something or spend his time on something that ridiculous, because there was no money to be made in stuff that couldn't work.
What?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Is that what he said?
Yeah. He said basically there's no economy in it. There's no way to make money out of it. That's why he didn't bother with it.
Out of an airline.
Out of a dirigible or an airship.
Well, the Germans had an airline with the Zeppelins for years. That was the first transatlantic flights.
Well, this is in the 1800s, so...
A little short-sighted of Edison. I'm a little surprised.
I'm not. He really wasn't the inventor. He just stole other people's ideas.
Yeah, we could get into a thing about Thomas Edison. Yeah, he had a big invention shop, and he employed a lot of inventors that actually invented a lot of things that he just ended up owning because they worked for him. The motion picture camera, the X-ray, all came out of Edison's workshops.
Yeah.
I don't know if he actually invented X-ray. I know it was a mobile X-ray that he invented. Mm-hmm. And the guy that invented that ended up dying of cancer because they didn't realize X-rays were harmful.
Two inventors were actually named. Well, two inventors were named as possible people of interest in terms of building these airships. And they come to us for the first one from George D. Collins out of San Francisco. He had claimed to have interactions with an individual who was very wealthy. He had seen the airship up close, met the inventor, had spent a few days with him initially, and then after half a dozen meetings, the inventor claimed that he had an invention that was going to change the world. And he was like, really? Well, I'm interested. Can you tell me more about it? And then just over time, he gained more confidence with this individual, and he claimed that it was a resident of Oroville. He was 47 and rich, and that he had developed an airship that was propelled by compressed air and would go 60 miles in 45 minutes. It was about 150 feet long and could seat 15 occupants. Now, when he told the newspapers this, being journalists of that day, they wanted to find out who this was, and they had more than enough information to go on. So they settled on a Dr. E.H. Benjamin, a dentist and inventor. They descended on him like locusts. So much so that he ended up leaving in the middle of the night to get away from all of the attention he was receiving. He claimed that no, he wasn't this inventor, that all of his inventions had to do with the field of dentistry, and then that was that. And then Collins had to just basically clam up because he couldn't prove anything. Following William Henry Harrison Hart, who was the former California Attorney General, claimed to be the lawyer for that same inventor and an inventor out of New Jersey, both of which were working on airships and were doing experimental secret flights. Well, it's important also to note that Henry Harrison's Hart's friends also claimed that he was inclined to tell tall tales and was very good at it. So those are the two people that came up to have some kind of claim, but never producing any evidence whatsoever, that there was some secret inventor developing these airships that people were seeing in the skies.
Well, let's look at some of the specific cases.
Sure.
Even if it was some secret inventor, there's still some really strange things that have occurred around these airship sightings, if they are to be believed. I would want to warn the listener, this was also an era of what's known as yellow journalism. Occasionally, journalists would write an outlandish story that was impossible to believe, sometimes in a satirical way. Mark Twain, our heralded American writer, was really good at it. He did it quite often, actually. They would write these big tall tales in newspapers, and people were not expected to believe it. It was just a form of entertainment, sort of a tall tale thing. This used to be a thing, I guess, who could come up with the craziest stories. These would actually get published in a newspaper, so we need to remember that as we delve into some of these stories.
So was it like having the National Enquirer as part of the New York Times?
Yeah. That's a good, not the National Enquirer, but what was it? Global News or something about Bat Boy and the ones that would have that. I miss those, man. I love that. Would be checking out at the grocery store and there would be these things on that. I mean, occasionally I'd buy one. I got to read that. President Clinton met space aliens. Now that definitely is yellow journalism.
Carnivorous slug devours cow in front of little boy.
Bat Boy was always my favorite. You know, they have him on the cover, his mouth wide open. It would always be. They would run a story about Bat Boy once every few months. So
his name is John Wayne. His father's Bruce Wayne.
Let's go over some of these specific stories.
I've got my favorites, but I'm going to let you go first.
So on November 19th, 1896, edition of the Stockton, California Daily Mail featured one of the earliest accounts of an alleged alien craft sighting. Colonel H.G. Shaw claimed while driving his buggy through the countryside near Stockton, he came across what appeared to be a landed spacecraft. Shaw described it as having a metallic surface, which was completely featureless apart from a rudder and pointed ends. He estimated a diameter of 25 feet and said the vessel was around 150 feet in total length. 3 slender, 7-foot tall, apparent extraterrestrials were said to approach from the craft while emitting a strange warbling noise. The beings reportedly examined Shaw's buggy, then tried to physically force him to accompany them back to the airship. The aliens were said to give up after realizing they lacked the physical strength to force Shaw aboard. They supposedly fled back to the ship, which lifted off the ground and sped out of sight. Shaw believed these beings were Martians sent to kidnap an Earthling for an unknowable and potentially nefarious purposes. This has been seen as some as the first alien abduction attempt. That sort of rules out the whole, it's an inventor, a rich and unknown inventor inventing an airship, if that story's to be believed.
Well, okay, so maybe this is some really early sports fans, and they painted themselves up for the game, and
7 foot tall, though.
7 foot tall, so maybe it's a pre-basketball type game that they're developing. I don't know. And they're, they're out just for a walk, and they want to get some people, try to draw some people into the crowd, to kick this sporting event off. And Shaw's just too cranky to go with them. Just, you know what Shaw was doing that day? You know why he was out and about?
No.
He was heading over to an area to try to pick up equipment to put together a exhibit for the Fresno Citrus Fair.
The Citrus Fair.
The Citrus Fair, I say. And that's when the aliens always attack during the Citrus Fair. When he described them, he said they had small hands, there were no nails on the fingers, the feet were twice as long as humans, and the toes were very usable, like they were, what did they...
Like monkey toes?
Like monkey toes, like they grabbed the ground and they had a great deal of control over the toes themselves. And they had a bag with a nozzle. They had small mouths, so he thought they didn't eat. He thought instead that they were able to consume gases, and that's how they lived. And he said there was a bag with a nozzle, and they had small mouths, not likely for eating, but rather living off the gases in those bags.
He inferred quite a bit from a attempted alien abduction.
Yeah, he did say that his thoughts on whether they were from Mars or not were completely his own. He speculated. And that when they talked, they warbled. I thought that was very interesting. Warbly type characters.
The mystery light then appeared over Sacramento on the evening of November 21st, 1896. It was seen over Folsom, San Francisco, Oakland, Modesto, and several other cities later that same evening, and was reportedly viewed by hundreds of witnesses.
You know, one thing I found very interesting was in this late period in November, like on November the 21st, 22nd, I think it was the 22nd, there was another sighting over Sacramento with the lights going in the opposite direction, but this time there were two lights. And most of the claims didn't indicate propellers or rudders or anything like that, but they did say they saw a structure and it was egg-shaped. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And in San Francisco, the mayor's daughter and two servants saw these two lights. And many of the other witnesses there included police and other upstanding members of society at the time. On November the 25th, the airships were seen again around Sacramento and the Bay Area, but also north of the Bay Area in Napa and Petaluma, where some ingenious entrepreneurs charged admission to view the airship through their telescope, and even as far as Chico, 81 miles north of Sacramento. By the end of November, the sightings had become intermittent. What's important here is that the airships had been seen numerous times at that point on the same day over vast distances, a total of 11 sightings on the 25th.
Right, and I want to reiterate, the technology and what existed in the day, maybe someone could have built an airship to do 10 miles or something like that under the right conditions. But, man, we're talking separated by hundreds of miles here. Just wasn't anything that could fly like that, and there wouldn't be for another 20 years.
Yeah, and the skeptics started coming out of the woodwork. Astronomy professors said that everyone had been seeing a sighting of Mars and Venus.
Well, of course.
No one claimed that they were seeing a weather balloon.
Oh, before the days of weather balloons. Now, this thing seems to, so they all start out in California. Then we're talking here in the 1890s. The cases seem to start migrating east. I have the Omaha Bee, a newspaper, reported on February 2nd, 1897, that an airship was sighted over Hastings, Nebraska, the previous day. And that's all the details I have on that.
All right, so I've got two things that I really loved about these airship stories. The first, and I found this really interesting, was people on the ground saw people on these airships and could hear them. And sometimes they could even hear them singing choruses of songs. I guess singing was a big thing back in the day.
Didn't have radio.
So people would liven up the day with some...
Or Spotify.
or Spotify. I have a little bit of a song here that I found that they said they were singing, and I found it really pretty interesting. They could hear them singing, "Never Gonna Give You Up, Never Gonna Let You Down, Never Gonna Run Around and Desert You, Never Gonna Make You Cry, Never Gonna Say Goodbye, Never Gonna Tell a Lie and Hurt You." And that is one of the songs that was heard by people on the ground as these airships were...
Now, wait a minute. What is that?
That is this song, this air
no, I mean, really,
shanties.
What is that?
That's Rick Astley. Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. Come on, man. That's where Rick got it. That was Rick's inspiration for the song.
The truth is, yeah, people did allegedly hear singing coming from these airships, from the baskets underneath of them, the ones that had them.
They even met them. So sometimes the ships would land, people would come out of the ships and interact with people on the ground. And in some cases, this mysterious Mr. Wilson was a character that would crop up starting in the Midwest. The first sighting, he came out and asked one of the people on the ground to mail letters for members of his crew. I guess because mailboxes weren't anywhere close to where they were landing out in these big fields, and he just wanted some nice local to help him out with that. Subsequent sightings of Mr. Wilson would occur throughout the other sightings that happened throughout the Midwest. But with no concrete evidence of this is just stuff that's being reported in the papers. And whether or not this is being made up by the people reporting, or whether it's being made up by people on the ground who are reporting it to the newspapers, it's hard to say.
I have another account. I like this one. In April 1897, John Haley and Adolph Winke of Springfield, Illinois, reported a flying craft of similar type whose pilot told them that it was a new invention flown at night to attract less attention. The pilot stated he had left Quincy 100 miles to the west only 30 minutes earlier, which, no way. Could that have happened?
Could have had Wally Coyote rocket saw on the back of that thing.
How fast would that be? 200 miles an hour.
43 miles an hour.
No, yeah, 43 miles. Well, that would have been 200 miles an hour. I have no idea when, but 200 miles per hour probably wasn't exceeded by any flying aircraft until maybe the 1920s, 1930s. Similar objects were reported in Indiana where a crew were making on-the-spot repairs. The pilot was tracked down by the press in Martinsville, where he made the statement that he had an airship in Brown County undergoing repairs and 3 machines flying in central states of the U.S. Also in April 1897, for more than 30 minutes, a huge airship was witnessed by jurors, judges, and lawyers who had gathered outside the courthouse in Harrison, Nebraska. It had a bright white light and colored lights around it and was oval-shaped with a box-like structure hanging from it and a propeller at the stern.
So where was this?
That was in Harrison, Nebraska.
Well, I know that bad alcohol was a prominent thing during this time in history. So you know what my favorite story I heard out of this whole airship phenomena, this airship flap of the late 1800s? This account comes from Alexander Hamilton of Leroy, Kansas. Supposedly occurred around April 19th and was published in the Yates Center Farmer's Advocate of April 23rd. And as everybody knows, the Yates Center Farmer's Advocate, that's a legit paper. So Hamilton and his son and a tenant witnessed an airship hovering over his cattle pen. And upon closer examination, the witness realized that a red cable from the airship had lassoed the heifer, but the heifer had also become entangled in the pen's fence. After trying unsuccessfully to free the heifer, Hamilton cut loose a portion of the fence, then stood up in amazement to see the ship and the cow all rise slowly and sail off into the distance. Now, he did find the cow a little bit later, butchered, in another one of his fields further down the road. So this is the first case of cattle mutilation. But the story has a bit of a twist, because later it was discovered that he belonged to a liars club and that they had this tendency to come up with these tall tales as a form of entertainment, a way to one-up each other, like fishing tales and that kind of thing. But I love that, just the idea of this cow being lifted in the air by an airship. And then
it's a pretty good story.
Yeah, I loved it.
Unfortunately, it was a fabrication, but yeah, pretty good. On April 10th, 1897, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch published a story reporting W.H. Hopkins encountered a grounded airship about 20 feet in length and 8 feet in diameter near the outskirts of Springfield, Missouri. The vehicle was apparently propelled by 3 large propellers and crewed by a beautiful, nude woman and a bearded man, also nude. Except for the beard, apparently. Hopkins attempted with some difficulty to communicate with the crew in order to ascertain their origins. Eventually, they understood what Hopkins was asking of them, and they both pointed to the sky and uttered something that sounded like the word Mars.
Or stars. You know, they're probably European. Sounds European.
And in April 16th, 1897, a story published by Table Rock Argus claimed that a group of anonymous but reliable witnesses had seen an airship sailing overhead. The craft had many passengers. The witnesses claimed that among the passengers was a woman tied to a chair, a woman attending her, and a man with a pistol guarding their apparent prisoner. Before the witnesses thought to contact the authorities, the airship was already gone.
Wow.
It's pretty weird.
I see that every day.
And that's something that seems really odd to me. Different stories where the occupants seem to either say they were from Mars or across the ocean, or they were always very vague about their origins, very vague about what they were doing. Sometimes they look strange. Sometimes they're dressed strange. But typically these airships, other than that one apparent almost abduction, they always appear to be human in most of these cases. There's some earlier cases. I found one from 1880. 2 witnesses in Louisville, Kentucky saw a flying object described as a man surrounded by machinery, which he seemed to be working with his hands, with wings protruding from his back. And a month later, there was a sighting in New Jersey where there was a similar sighting. It was written in the New York Times, said it apparently was a man with bat wings and improvised frog legs. The monster waved his wings in answer to the whistle of a locomotive.
Okay.
Don't have a date on this, but there was a mystery airship in Chile described as gigantic shining bird driven by a noisy motor. So, there's a few of these. I mean, and again, these newspapers, it started around the 1890s. And if we want to kind of bring it back to the 1890s, late 1896 through 1897, we see these newspapers reporting these all around the country. But then they all kind of reach a culmination of probably the most famous airship case. And Jimmy, do you know which one that one is?
If I had to guess, it would probably be the Aurora, Texas sighting.
Yeah. And listeners, if you've ever watched a UFO show, I can almost guarantee this case has been covered on it at some point or another.
On April the 19th of 1897, there was an article in the Dallas Morning News written by an S.E. Hayden describing a UFO crash. This is the Roswell before Roswell, folks. The UFO said to have hit a windmill on the property of a judge around 6 a.m. local time. That would be Central Time. The pilot, who was, according to the people who retrieved the body, was not from this earth, obviously did not survive the crash, and was buried with Christian rites by a traveling pastor named William Russell Tabor, presumably at the Aurora Cemetery. Wreckage from the crash site was dumped into a nearby well located under the damaged windmill. Other pieces of the wreckage also ended up in the alien grave, according to the story. Adding to the mystery is the story of Mr. Brawley Oates, who purchased Judge Proctor's property around 1935, cleaned out debris from the well in order to use it as a water source, but later developed an extremely severe case of arthritis, which he claimed to be a result of contaminated water at that site. I'm not sure what to make of this, but we can go back and just dig a little deeper, and I think we can come up with a pretty good idea of what this crash in Aurora, Texas was really all about.
I found a report that said the pilot, who was reported not to be of this world, Army Signal Service officer named T.J. Weems, speculated that the being was a Martian. They gave him a burial with Christian rites by a traveling pastor named William Russell Tabor at nearby Aurora Cemetery. Even to this day, there's a Texas historical marker mentioning this incident. I don't know when this was first broken in a UFO book, but I know it goes back to the 70s. There was an episode of UFO Files on December 19th, 2005. They had an episode titled The Texas Roswell, and it featured a 1973 investigation led by Bill Case, an aviator writer for Dallas Times-Herald, and he was the state director for the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. He uncovered 2 eyewitnesses of the crash. Mary Evans, who was 15 at the time, told how her parents went to the crash site and they forbade her from going, and they discovered the alien body. Charlie Stevens, who was age 10, told how he saw the airship trailing smoke as it headed north toward Aurora. He wanted to see what happened, but his father made him finish his chores. Later, he told how his father went to the town the next day and saw the wreckage from the craft. MUFON investigated the Aurora Cemetery, uncovered a grave marker that appeared to show a flying saucer of some sort, as well as readings from its metal detector. MUFON asked for permission to exhume the site, but the Cemetery Association declined permission. After the MUFON investigation, the marker mysteriously disappeared from the cemetery and a 3-inch pipe was placed into the ground. MUFON's metal detector no longer picked up metal readings from the grave, thus it was presumed that the metal was removed from the grave. MUFON's report eventually stated that the evidence was inconclusive but did not rule out the possibility of a hoax. And the episode featured an interview with Mayor Brammer, who discussed the town's tragic history. 2008, UFO Hunters also did a documentary on it called First Contact. And I think that's the one where, do you remember There's one of them where a guy actually went down in the well. Like they uncovered the concrete and he went down looking for stuff, couldn't find anything. Shockingly.
Not so shockingly if you look a little deeper into the story, right?
Okay.
So if you look at the original story, let's pick one of them because it was published several different times. Let's read this in its entirety because it's not very long. About 6 o'clock this morning, the early risers of Aurora were astonished at the sudden appearance of the airship which has been sailing through the county. It was traveling due north and much closer to the ground than ever before. Evidently, some of the machinery was out of order, for it was making a speed of only 10 or 12 miles an hour and gradually settling towards Earth. It sailed directly over the public square, and when it reached the north part of town, collided with the tower of Judge Proctor's windmill and went to pieces with a terrific explosion, scattering debris over several acres of ground, wrecking the windmill and water tank, and destroying the judge's flower garden.
Oh.
Yeah. The pilot of the ship is supposed to have been the only one on board, and while his remains are badly disfigured, enough of the original has been picked up to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world. Mr. T.J. Weems, the United States Signal Service officer at this place and an authority on astronomy, gives it as his opinion that he was an inhabitant of the planet Mars. Papers found on this person, evidently the record of his travels, are written in some unknown hieroglyphics and cannot be deciphered. The ship was too badly wrecked to form any conclusion as to its construction or motive power. It was built of an unknown metal resembling somewhat a mixture of aluminum and silver, and it must have weighed several tons. The town is full of people today who are viewing the wreck and gathering specimens of the strange metal from the debris. The pilot's funeral will take place at noon tomorrow. So that is an account from the day of that event. One of the things I thought was really pretty telling was T.J. Williams, the expert astronomer. He was actually Aurora's blacksmith and farrier and knew no more about astronomy than his average customer. It was also pretty typical of the time for the judge to tell tall tales, and in his local paper even expand on it and make it more grandiose. And some of this was possibly to attract more business to the town, as it was a town in decline. I guess there was a railroad that was going to a town nearby, and most of the traffic and people were starting to go there and through that area, and less through Aurora. So that may have been one of the reasons why it is speculated that they made this tall tale up to bring people to the town, try to drum up some business.
And that is a very down-to-earth explanation, because have you ever heard of the fur-bearing trout?
No. Tell me about this trout. Is it tasty?
The United States furry trout. An account of a furry trout appeared in 1929 in Montana Wildlife Magazine and was first noted by J.H. Hicken. Hicken's account states that when the fish is caught, the change of temperature from the water to the atmosphere is so great that the fish explodes upon being taken out of the water, and fur and skin come off in one perfect piece, making it available for commercial purposes and leaving the body of the fish for refrigerator purposes or eating as desired.
I want to catch that fish.
There was a Wilbur Fauci, Secretary of the Chamber of Commerce. He promoted a story so convincing that it was picked up by a local newspaper. And according to Fauci, the trout grew fur due to the cold temperatures of the Arkansas River and shed the fur as water temperatures warmed up in the summer. In November 1938, a story of the Puebloan chieftain recounted the hairy trout history and stated that old-timers living along the Arkansas River told tales for many years of fur-bearing trout indigenous to the waters of the Arkansas near there. As it turned out, the Secretary of the Chamber of Commerce in this town came up with the story and made a furry trout, right? Just stuck some kind of fur on it and stuffed it and put it on his wall. And then they ran this story, and it brought people around to their town to try and fish and catch this furry trout.
For an extra $10, you can get a furry trout stamp.
Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. So, so there is some merit to that. And it was a different time, a different kind of time than we live in today. These kind of tall tales and sort of things, people could get away with them. And maybe people were a little more gullible in those days. I don't know. But they could tell a story about a furry trout, and people would believe it and come and try and catch one. So, and bring traffic through the channel. Is this what happened in Aurora, Texas? I don't know. It's possible. And it could be that Aurora, Texas Judge Proctor was taking advantage of these other airship stories that were in the news at the time, because they were certainly around. They were in California, they were in the Midwest, they were in Michigan. So it could be that, let's say one crashed here, and then people will come for miles around to check it out. I mean, it's possible. And it could be, just like the other individual that was in the Liars Club and made up the story about the airship trying to lift his cow away. And there's a signed affidavit where he said, yeah, this is a tall tale. So it was that time. But on the other hand, a lot of these newspapers reported these stories and said there were hundreds of witnesses, some with substantiated witnesses. Because I don't know, I guess people forgot about this. That's another odd thing about this. It isn't until modern times, until now, that people have started looking back at these airship stories and asking the question, are these the precursors to the modern UFO era? Were these airships actually UFOs, flying saucers, right? I found somewhere, and of course my notes are all over the place, but I did find where someone in the 1950s interviewed someone who remembered the stories when they were happening, and he worked at the newspaper as in the mailroom. He was really young. A lot of the details through the passage of time had gone over the past 50 years, but he said he remembered the stories and said they were taken seriously. That's all he could really remember. But it wasn't like, oh no, that was all just, a big joke. We were all just, writing these crazy stories. I mean, apparently the stories were taken seriously, that people were seeing something in the sky. I don't know what to make of it, but it's definitely an interesting chapter in the UFO stories.
Well, can we look at explanations? Are we ready for that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to run down the list of explanations I've.
Is it on crack or anything like last week? Or
of course. I mean, you're going to have some of that in here, but so the first is inventors, or like Edison. Could it have been a mysterious inventor? And let me put this one out there. Maybe, just maybe, it's an inventor who developed this airship, and there was a bit of hysteria coupled with an actual sighting of a singular airship. And this mysterious inventor is flying it around, say, Sacramento, and then it just spreads like wildfire through the news in this hysterical way. And then he's like, okay, I got to back off now because they're finding me. Maybe it was that dentist. So then he moves his area of operation to Nebraska. He puts it up there and does some test flights there. And then maybe he gets down to Texas and ends up crashing it in Aurora and dies. And then that ends the airship sightings. And the rest of it is just hysteria up over that one event.
You got to say, okay, so let's say we're assuming that what people said they saw, what was published in the paper, that's reality. That is what we're talking about. They saw these things, and that's a possible explanation for it. What's the alternative if it's not an earthbound inventor with technology seemingly 20, 25 years in advance of anything else in its day?
Mm-hmm.
Then we're talking about
a large
something
batch
from another world, something from somewhere else.
It could be we're also talking about a large batch of bad alcohol. I didn't realize that bad alcohol was a really big deal back then. You had problems with it, apparently.
Okay.
It could be hoaxes and mass hysteria. I mean, that seems pretty reasonable, right? People seeing perfectly normal things. Venus, Mars, ships at sea that look like they're actually above the water, and they're mistaking them for ships, like in the New Zealand case. Betelgeuse was also suggested as a possible explanation for some of the sightings, Betelgeuse being one of the brightest stars in the sky that had a red tint to it.
Betelgeuse.
And then, the newspapers had, skin in the game because they want to sell papers. What better way to sell a paper than to be sensationalist about it?
So when we're talking about how many cases, we've only talked about a handful here. How many reports do we have from newspapers from that era?
So looking at the statistics that I looked up, found it was 1,200 newspaper articles, 400 different papers, 41 states, and 6 Canadian provinces. So it's pretty significant.
Did they have something like API back then? I don't think so. Like the
Associated
Newswire,
Press,
where they could just pick it up and repeat stories?
No, but I think they're wise enough to see a good deal, at least a newspaper company, a good deal when it comes along. Bob down the street, 2 towns over, is selling a crap ton of papers. Hey, Bob, how you doing that? Well, I'll put these airship stories in my paper. Well, what's that about? He says, well, whatever you want. Just make something up. But, I also want to leave on the table that maybe some of the sightings were legitimate. Some of them were extraterrestrial in nature. The descriptions of them match the descriptions of sightings we've seen in like the Lonnie Zamora case and in the 2004 Nimitz case of an egg-shaped craft without any control surfaces on it, flying at incredible speeds. And some of these, while most of them are floating, some of them are reported to have flown at really fast speeds and multicolored lights. So who knows? Let's leave that one on the table. And I like how Jacques Vallée describes it. You've read more Jacques Vallée than I have, but when you're looking up in the sky and you see something unusual, I think you probably try to couch it in a way that's most familiar to you. And if you're looking at something extraordinary, it's only as extraordinary as the most extraordinary thing you've heard about in your popular culture. So for the 1800s, it's airships.
Yeah, for me, that's what and especially looking at this airship case, and it kind of touches on an idea that I've been having. As we've stated before, you and I both kind of got into this. I mean, we've both casually been interested in fantastic things, UFOs in particular, but also cryptids to some degree. I didn't know a lot of details until I really dug into these things and really started looking into it. And Jacques Vallée touches on some of this in Passport to Magonia, of how our perceptions of what the other is. The idea I'm having here is, in this era, around the late 1800s, 1900s, airships were on their way in. There were already some experiments. So people would have seen illustrations and drawings of airships with the big propellers and stuff. People felt this coming, knew it was coming, designers and things like that. Just the same way we draw pictures of a spaceship. You look at spaceships drawn in the 1950s, they look different than they do today because of what technology we know about now. Because I also thought about that case that Project Sign reported on. That's what I was trying to dig here and find the details on it, but I just not handy. Hang on one second. Actually, I'll look at my old notes. Yeah, here we go. So what it brought to mind to me, we talked about this in the history of UFOs, one of our very first episodes. It brought to mind the Charles Whitted encounter. It was in 1948. It was 2 airline pilots over Montgomery, Alabama. They saw a spaceship fly past them with rocket exhaust shooting out and windows along the side of the craft. Okay, this is the 1940s. What did it look like? It looked like a Buck Rogers spacecraft. Something that these men both agreed that it looked that way. They both made drawings when they got back on the ground and said, this is what it looked like. It overtook our airplane and shot up into the skies. Now, of course, down-to-earth explanation for that is one of those Earth-grazing meteors. It just zoomed through the atmosphere and went back out into space. And it's possible because even back then that there was an encounter like that. But these men saw a Buck Rogers or a Flash Gordon spaceship, an old-timey, old-fashioned idea of what a spaceship would look like. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at these cases around the turn of the 20th century. People are seeing something. Maybe they are airships. Maybe they do have the big propellers and all that. But what if they're seeing something else and their minds can't really comprehend what it is, so it tries to put it into some kind of something they do understand. That's the way it manifests itself in your mind, because that's what we do as human beings. We try to put patterns together. We look at anything, just like at the Lowell Observatory. When he first viewed Mars, he saw, the Marianas Trench, but in his mind, he started seeing canals all over the planet and drew them out. But it turned out there's no canals there. He was just trying to make patterns out of what he was seeing, through a telescope.
We're pattern-seeking mammals, right? So we're going to try to apply a pattern to everything we see.
All right. And so what does that mean, in these airship cases? Were they really airships exactly as these people described? Were they something else that was extraordinary and that's the way their minds manifested it as they remembered it later?
Or
is it something else? Or was it a logical explanation? But there was just so many reports, so many hundreds of these sightings.
it could have been a very large batch of bad tuna salad made with Belgian mayo.
I don't know, but it's just something. It's an idea that a common theme I've been seeing. I think how the shapes of UFOs tend to evolve over time and things like that. I wonder if are the UFOs changing, or is it different species? I mean, whatever. Let's say they are visitors or something, or is it something else, something that maybe beyond our understanding?
You know what? There's two shapes of UFOs that have persisted: the egg shape and the cigar shaped. And we see that.
Well, the flying saucer, the flying disc is still seen. It doesn't seem as common now as it was back in the 50s and 60s.
Flying disc, I mean, have they been seen throughout history as prolifically as these other shapes? We've got triangle, we've got egg, we've got cigar shaped, and we've got the disc shaped, right?
Yeah, the triangle shape seems to be something newer. I remember first really hearing about the triangle shaped UFOs around the Belgium UFO cases in the 1990s. But since then, we've had others.
Right. But they
and of course, conspiracy theorists say that it's the T-3B, some craft we've devised from captured alien technology.
Well, they ship that mayo internationally, I think.
And if you wonder what that reference is, go back and listen to Belgium UFOs. I don't remember what episode that was. I need to start putting that up there. We have enough episodes now. We need to have a list ready, on hand.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, that's just an idea. Like I said, just some speculation here at the end. But anyway, fascinating case here. Jacques Vallée has a new book out, just published a few months ago. He has a co-author with it. But they look at these. They look at some of the ancient UFOs all the way through airships and things. So I definitely want to get a copy of that. And if I do, we may revisit this topic at a future time.
Yeah, I'd love to read that book and maybe get back into it if there's something more meat to the story, for sure.
But anyway, pretty neat. Oh, and one last thing. The very first UFO picture is from 1870, and it shows a bank of clouds and what many people say looks like a cigar-shaped UFO silhouetted against the clouds. We should probably use that as our on our webpage for this episode, I would say, and on Facebook.
Let's do that. Hey, let me ask you, did they have any men on bicycles propelling that cigar-shaped airship, that UFO?
I haven't heard that, but, it's just really strange.
I love seeing all those pictures with the men on bicycles propelling it, they're running on bicycles and their little propellers going.
Proposed ways of propulsion and stuff. I think there was something.
There was a sighting.
One of those early experiments in the 1870s or something. I think they had a hand crank propeller.
Yeah.
I was reading about that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all I've got on this subject. Do you have anything else, Jimmy?
Nope, that's all I have.
All right, well, great. Before we get out of here, I'd like to remind everyone, please rate and review the podcast. It helps other people find the show. If you would like to support the show, go to our webpage, cosmicsponge.com. Look for the little coffee cup icon in the upper right-hand corner. That way you can help us out, help us continue the show. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Our contact information is firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. And with all that being said, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll see you next week.
Jimmy Coe, keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground. Catch you next week. Oh, one more thing, Stephen. We're going to have a contest, and we're going to run it from the 1st of December to the last of December, and then announce it first of the year.
All right. Well, it sounds good. Everybody keep your ears peeled for that. Can you peel your ears? Eyes peeled, ears open.
Maybe if you're some kind of weird serial killer.
All right. Let's get out of here. I guess I'll see you next week.
Yep. Later. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.